Hey everyone, it's Jason, and this is your midweek cruise news update. And we have a cruise passenger that received a huge bill because they were seasick, a couple that was escorted off their cruise ship because it was overbooked. And if you were going to give a recommendation, how many days do you think someone's first cruise should be? So cruise story number one, and there's a couple lessons that we can learn off of this, as a cruise passenger was sailing from Seattle to go to Alaska, and they used the scopolamine patch, or the scope patch, and they said they've used it on cruises before, no issues. But they were seriously seasick. They said it was so bad they were thinking about at the next port flying home. They were that seasick. I've been there, I know how that feels. I don't know if you felt that, but I understand that completely. They went down to the medical center, and the medical center gave them some IVs because they felt they were possibly dehydrated, and they told them to take off the patch and just use Bonine. Their bill was $2,300 for that visit. Now, they said they had an amazing cruise, and they had cruise insurance, and they talked to their insurance company, and they said they'll handle it. Now, that's really lesson number one. You really need to make sure you have travel or cruise insurance when you're cruising. It does cover things like that. Don't get caught up. And there's all these people that replied under this message telling their stories about how they had to go to the medical center and they were glad they had cruise or travel insurance. The other thing that I thought was interesting is, and this is something that I've noticed fishing offshore in Florida many days, some rough weather, is when you get seasick, a lot of times you're dehydrated. And whether it's from drinking or just not taking in enough liquids, that is something that you really have to pay attention to. The other thing that I thought was kind of interesting in all this is they said that normally the scope patch works. And I've heard people say, look, they've had Bonine and it worked all the time, and then it stopped working on one cruise. And they had to take something else. So then they took Bonine again and it worked on another cruise. You never know how your body's reacting to things like this. So I suggest always having a couple different things for seasickness, just in case one thing doesn't work. And another tip here is, if you're on a cruise ship, it starts to move a little, it's some windier weather out there, some rougher seas. If you go up to the buffet, many times you'll see a lot of green apples. I have no idea why green apples worked. They worked when we were on the boat. They worked on the cruise ships. I've heard numerous people say this, including crew members. They were like, hey, this is what we use, and some ginger. A lot of people also do that as natural remedies. Do you have a natural remedy you use for seasickness? Let me know. So cruise story number two, I don't think I've ever heard a story like this. So imagine you get on your cruise and a few hours later, you're told you're going to have to be escorted off because we don't have a cabin for you. So that's what happened to these cruise passengers. They showed up in Port Canaveral to get on the Carnival Freedom. It was a 5-day cruise, and they booked an inside guaranteed cabin. When they went to check in, they were told by the port staff, hey, we don't have a cabin available for you, but go ahead and board the ship. So they get on the ship around 11 a.m., they go to guest services, and they say, hang tight, we don't have a cabin available yet. Well, they checked back with them. It's not like Carnival checked with them. They went back and checked around 2:30. And they said, hey, look, we don't have a cabin yet. They said, we're so sorry. We're going to have to escort you off the cruise ship because we have no availability. So around 3 p.m., one of the pier staff escorts them off the cruise ship. And they said, we have never had this happen where everyone shows up for their cruise. And they were apologizing. Well, the Carnival Glory was also in port, but it was a 4-day cruise. And this supervisor was able to put them in his car, his personal car, and take them over to the Carnival Glory, where they boarded the ship. The Carnival Glory actually, they said, waited for them. They boarded around 5 o'clock, and they said they were exhausted, and they were able to get them a balcony cabin on the Carnival Glory. Obviously, they had booked an inside guarantee. Said around 8:30, they were exhausted, they crashed. Around 8:30, they went back down to guest services, and they said, hey, here's our credit card, and how do we resolve this? Obviously, would like some compensation for our troubles. And they said, well, you're going to need to call corporate. Now, This is where on the board, a lot of people are like, no, you get this resolved before you leave that cruise ship. And I have to agree. But can you imagine a story like this? Can you imagine this, the high and the low of just the emotions of the day? Now, what do you guys think would be fair compensation? Now, personally to me, I think they need to be giving them a future cruise booking for that 5 day, that full amount, the difference in the price, and some shipboard credit on the Carnival Glory, at least. That's my opinion. But guys, we're hearing this more and more and more. The Carnival Luminosa this past weekend, out of going to Alaska, there was issues with being overbooked. The Brilliance of the Seas by Royal Caribbean out of Vancouver for the 23rd sailing, there's multiple people on Facebook saying that they were contacted by Royal Caribbean and they were told, hey, you have a guaranteed cabin and we're not sure we're going to have a cabin for you. Basically giving them a heads up, don't fly out yet. What a crazy situation. It's just an interesting thing. I don't ever book guaranteed cabins. I've made that mistake a couple times way back when. Now, I do understand it. I understand seeing the price differences there. But do you want to go through this trouble, or do you really want your own cabin and being able to pick it? Let me know if you guys book guaranteed cabins and what you think about this crazy story. Have you ever heard of anybody being on the ship and then kicked off the ship because they didn't have availability? What a crazy story that was. So before I get to cruise story number 3, I would ask that you please like this video as it does help the channel grow. Also consider subscribing as we're on the path to 100,000 subscribers before we go on our Alaskan cruise at the end of August. If you would help me out with that, I would greatly appreciate it. Thanks so much. So cruise story number 3, and I saw this on one of the boards, and I want to hear from you guys. If you were to make a recommendation to a first-time cruiser, how many days do you think their first cruise should be? Now, it always used to be the rule that the 7-day cruises out of the Caribbean, you'd have the nicer ships. And Royal Caribbean went and changed that game last year, and they have Lure of the Seas now, the Utopia of the Seas, the Wonder of the Seas. All will be doing cruises under 7 days on beautiful big ships. Would you suggest someone doing that? Or would you just say, hey, do the full experience, do the 7-day cruise, and you just get to enjoy that, all the amenities of those big, beautiful ships? Let me know what you guys would do. Now, for us, our first cruise was back in 2003, or mine was actually. Lori had cruised before being in Florida, and it was on the Grand Princess out of Fort Lauderdale. Loved it. It was 7 days. Now, us together, we've never cruised on anything less than 6 days. We did a 6-day cruise on the Celebrity Equinox last year, and I just have to tell you, it was just too short. I like 7 and 8 day cruises at a minimum. That's us. How many days was your first cruise? Have you ever done any of these shorter cruises? Let me know in the comments. So I appreciate you guys watching. Thanks so much for the support. And until I talk to you soon, happy cruising.